Most organizations struggle to deliver real business value from any investments that they make in digital or information technology. What lies behind this challenge is the perspective that, well, actually, IT is somebody else's job. Hi, I'm Joe Peppert.
And I'm Martin Mocker. And we're your hosts of Doing Digital Differently, the podcast that challenges some very comfortable assumptions about how we lead increasingly digital organizations.
In this episode, we are going to have a discussion with Pablo Ciano. He is a board member of DHL Group and the CEO of DHL eCommerce. One of the areas that we're going to explore with him is the role of the non-tech executive in making tech-related decisions.
Joe, we have a problem.
We do. And it is that for decades, organizations do not find it easy to deliver on the expected, outcomes from investments that they make in technologies.
Absolutely. And to put some numbers behind this, I looked at a number of studies, and you see that the success rate is between 5 and 55%, meaning huge chunk of investments in digital technologies does not deliver what the companies are expecting. So companies spend money on digital technologies hoping to get a revenue uplift, to reduce cost, and it's just not happening. And as you said, it's not new. The studies that I looked at 2015 to 2025, and we have the chaos report from the Standish Group going back to 1994, and the highest success rate for IT project investments was 39%. So this is indeed a perennial issue, and it's not going away. So the key question is, why is that?
Yeah, we do have a problem. And as I've said, we do know what it takes. I think in the public sector, failings are made public, and very often there is a review conducted. When you read these reviews, the reasons why the project either failed or underachieved are very, very similar. So you've got to ask yourself, well, why can't we get it right? What is the reason behind this situation?
Let's take an actual example, a recent one. You made me aware of this. It's from your home country, from Ireland. It's the Irish Arts Council, right? And they had an independent review after a project for introducing an ERP-like system. After that investment didn't go well, they had to write off millions of euros. And they were citing a number of challenges, and they will not be new to anyone who's ever been involved in IT project failures. I'm just going to paraphrase some of them. So this is lack of experience with projects of this scale and scope, no single primary owner, over-reliance on external supplier resources, unrealistic business case, unrealistic timeframes, lack of appropriate resource allocation. And here come some interesting ones. No adequate culture of change management to ensure that new ways of working could be introduced under a streamlined, more automated system. And that's going to lead to the topic of this episode here, leadership lacking adequate expertise to critically question and assess the issues arising in the project and make fully informed decision at critical junctures where the project evolved. This is from an independent report. So that indicates we indeed know what's going wrong. And one of the key points is business leaders are not taking on accountability for getting these investments right and getting the results actually from these investments.
Absolutely. And it's the leadership that is provided. I don't mean here the leadership that's provided by the chief information officer, chief digital officer, or the tech teams. It's more about the leadership provided by the business leadership of the organization. And I know, Martin, we don't like to make this distinction between IT and the business, but the reality is we do have this very strong demarcation that exists in most organizations. And I think one of the reasons why this exists is that there is a sort of a dominant orthodoxy that somehow is framing how business leaders behave and act, and shapes the things they do and decisions and how they think in respect of technology. The belief that somehow technology is this magical thing. It's the solution to the problem that we have in the organization. We've got a glitch in our supply chain. Well, guess what? If we shoot technology at the problem, that somehow the problem is going to dissipate and go away. The belief that technology has got an intrinsic value, and that we just need to get it in.
Every time there's a new technology, in these days, it's artificial intelligence. This basic belief comes back, this belief that technology is going to create the value, and it's not. It's about you as a business leader making a decision about using technology that is going to change how you run your business, how you are going to hire people, how are you going to sell products, how are you going to manufacture products, and what features do your products have. But these are all business managerial decisions. They're not technology decisions. And this is why it's so detrimental that business executives think this is not my job. Unfortunately, these are called digital transformations, and people stop hearing anything after the word digital. It comes back to that point. Digital is not my job. This is what I have the chief digital officer or the chief information officer for. And so the knee-jerk reaction is someone else needs to do this. I have to come back to a quote here. The chairperson of the Irish Arts Council. If I create the impression that I don't love Ireland, the opposite is true. I love Ireland. But this is a great example that you made me aware of. And the quote is from a hearing where they talked about this failed project we just mentioned earlier.
In the Irish Parliament.
Yeah, exactly. What she said is this here, quote, I believe that the expectation of, in this case, state bodies, to carry the burden of a growing capability and competency requirement, such as ICT, so information communication technology, is in need of questioning. That's a complicated sentence to say, I cannot be made accountable here for the success or failure of IT investments. This is not my job. This has to be someone else's job. And that's part of the issue here.
Absolutely. And coming back to the point, the belief that I don't have a technical background as a business leader, therefore I am ill-equipped to make technology decisions. But I think that's to misunderstand what is required.
Yeah, totally. Technology is only part of the solution. A big part is, we need to redesign how we work. So our processes, we need to have our people have different skills and so on and so forth. And this is why business executives need to play a super important role. If our listeners ask themselves at this point in time, what will be indicators that show that in our company we have that belief system as well? You came up with one test. If you have a project that is called the SAP project or the Salesforce project, you're putting the label of the vendor or of the technology on that project to indicate this is a tech project. This is not called the let's make warehousing better project. I know the name isn't great, but that is what it's about, making warehousing better. What it's called the SAP project. And that exemplifies this mindset of, this is a tech project and clearly I'm a business leader. This cannot be my job.
Absolutely right. And so there are sort of signals to the situation that exists in companies. That distinction that's often made between or using the language of IT and the business. We don't talk about marketing and the business or manufacturing and the business or supply chain and the business, because that's that's part of the business and that's part of what we do. The presence of shadow IT. Why does shadow IT exist in an organization? And just another point is the word solution. We often talk about the IT solution. That gives the wrong impression. IT is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It's going to be a combination of technology and business change, organization, people. And we got to remember that at the end of the day, technology doesn't change organizations, people do.
Another one you alluded to is this proliferation of roles. You have this chief information officer, you have the chief digital officer, you might have the chief data officer, now the chief AI officer. The knee-jerk reaction is, I can't do it, I need someone else.
You've left out the chief analytics officer or the chief technology officer. We got this alphabet soup of different role titles in respect of digital. Research reveals that there is considerable confusion among their colleagues as to exactly what they do.
And the result of all of this is that you as a business leader cannot challenge the investments that are core to the company's progress. How the company works, the features of the products, whether they address customer issues, you cannot challenge these investments. And that's actually the core of your job, to challenge investments that change how the company is doing business. And then you don't make decisions about IT because you think it's not your job, or you make the wrong decisions. Projects then fail, investments fail. But blame remains with the techies, because as a business leader, certainly, coming back to the quote we talked about earlier, nobody can expect you to get this right. So nothing will change. And we have a self-perpetuating cycle of digital investment failure and frustration.
Yeah, the principal reason why technology investments either fail or underachieve is generally not because the technology didn't work. Primarily, it comes down to people, behavioral, cultural, organizational issues. And the fact that within the program to, implement the investment, we didn't address these adequately. It's not a technology investment. It's a business transformation program.
So in summary, there's only one group of people who can actually help their organizations to break out of this cycle of digital investment failure. And there's only one group that can improve the success rate that we talked about in the very beginning. And that group is business leaders. And this is why in this episode, we want to explore what it really means for business leaders to take ownership of digital decisions. What changes when you stop saying, that's not my job? And what can we learn from someone who has lived on both sides of the business IT or business digital divide? And for this, we invited Pablo Ciano, member of the board of management of DHL Group and the CEO of DHL eCommerce. So great to have you. Welcome to the show, Pab.
Thank you, Martin and Joe. Very happy to be here.
Welcome, Pablo. Kick off. It's really maybe just to give a little bit of background about yourself. Obviously, now you're responsible for e-commerce. So how did you kind of, move through your career to actually get into a position where now you are head of e-commerce at DHL?
I started in DHL 20 years ago in the strategy and business development organization in the US for one of our business units. And in that capacity, I was running all critical programs and strategic programs on behalf of the CEO of the US business. And at that point in time, DHL in the US, in particular this business unit, DHL Express, was suffering from an acquisition that was done in the year 2000 or so. And a new CEO came in to make sure that acquisition was executed in line with expectations, because it was not working well. We were losing $5 million per day. So I became the Chief Transformation Officer for working to that new CEO with a very broad agenda that was much less about strategy, thinking, planning. It was about execution of that transformation. And a key component of that transformation was not only working on the restructuring of our portfolio, what to sell, how to position ourselves in the US and so on, but it was also about improving or changing processes and technology. And at the core of all of that, it was highly enabled by an massive IT transformation where we took systems from other countries and put it into the US. And that led for me to learn not only about business, very generic, very broad experience, but also to learn about IT enough to understand and have an opinion. And that led to becoming CIO for the US after the transformation, then CIO for the Americas, then CEO for Latin America. So with my first P&L responsibility. And then after that, I was offered the position of head of corporate development for the DHL group based in Germany. Moved to Germany in 2018. And after doing 4 or 5 years of that, which gave me a very broad experience on other geographies and other businesses, a lot of M&A, acquisition, portfolio restructuring, I was offered the position of head of one of our business units, which is DHL eCommerce. Not a linear, never planned, but a fantastic journey so far.
So you're not a techie by training. You studied business in Argentina. You have an MBA from Darden, and you started out with business. So how did this feel to take on responsibility as CIO?
It was great experience because I was in the transformation role, and the core of the transformation was mainly about IT. I learned enough about what the IT landscape should look like. And as we always like to say, we don't talk about IT in isolation. We talk about platforms, and platforms are process, people, and technology. We don't talk about technology only. Of course, you have some infrastructure things in technology that are, independent and agnostic to the process. But we always talk about processes, people, and IT. And I had a pretty good experience on the first two as part of all of this transformation. Mm-hmm. And the third one was understood well enough. And I have to say that I really enjoyed it because usually in IT, you have a touch and insight into every single corner of the company. And usually if you follow the flow of data, you end up understanding how the company operates. Mm-hmm. So it's a great way to go very deep into how the company works and how we make money.
I'm glad we have you. This podcast is called Doing Digital Differently, and you kind of seem to be reacting to becoming CIO very differently to how most business executives would react to this. You know that there's this joke about CIO stands for career is over. Did you at no point have that feeling like, oh my gosh, before you became CIO, you were head of staff of the CEO office, I think. Did you at no point feel, oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into here?
No, totally the opposite. First of all, I think that every function can be the end of your career if you don't, of course, do the best that you can every single time. So I don't think that those type of things or those type of potential end of career situations are exclusive or unique to any function. They are applicable. It's more about the people, not about the function. And in my case, it was totally the opposite. It was a great opportunity because becoming CIO for the US allowed me to not only continue learning about the business, understanding and implementing, of course, the transformation that we were conducting, but I had a seat at the table of the US management board. So by sitting there 85% of the time in that management board, you're not talking about IT, you're talking, of course, about business and how the business. So it was a great learning. I always found it as a grooming opportunity for me to learn more about the business, being there with the rest of my colleagues from the management board, commercial operations, finance. So totally the opposite. I saw it as a way forward and a stepping stone to achieving more.
That comment of yours that you had a seat at the table, from your experience, how important is that?
It was critical for two reasons. For my job, of course, of IT, it was critical to understand what was going on in the business, Now, of course, it's a no-brainer. Every CIO, CTO, CDO is the right hand of the CEO. But this 15 years ago was not that common. And being at the table with other managers and the people that were running the company gave me a good opportunity to do my job better and know more about IT. And know more about the business to ensure that IT was supporting the business. And then the second one was expanding my knowledge from a non-IT perspective. So it was learning everything that was going on in the company from a more managerial point of view and the critical functions of course, operations, commercial, and finance mainly. So it was both helping me do my job better and also expanding my knowledge and my expertise.
You mentioned CIO, CDO, because I think something that we're seeing is what we would refer to as the kind of the alphabet soup of sort of digital data roles. So you were the CIO. There may or may not have been a chief technology officer, a chief data officer, a chief digital officer, a chief analytics officer. Now organizations are putting a chief AI officers. What's your view in respect of all of these digital roles?
If you want my true answer to that,
yes, please.
is I think that technology is progressing at the speed that business and organizational structures cannot keep up with. And you have the basic technology elements from the CTO before and everything that happened with infrastructure, cloud, and all of that, and data, which of course was another layer on top of that, and now AI. And I think that all of these new positions are positions that are trying to somehow have someone that will try to figure out what to do with these new waves of technology, some of which could be pretty, damaging. And at the same time, you have the old guard of IT, so you cannot get rid of your CTO, and the CTO doesn't have the skills to understand AI. So, okay, well, let's bring in and then a chief AI officer. So I think it's a way for organizations to cope with the speed and change of IT in general. In a perfect world, of course, you have someone that has a broad spectrum of understanding of technology, infrastructure, communications, and AI as well. Are those positions needed? In my view, it's not that much about the position. All of these are sometimes, things created by consultants to create. You need to have an AI strategy, an AI office, an AI whatever. But it's more important than that. It's that if these are technology waves that don't kill you, but they can damage your business, you better have someone higher up in the organization and capable enough, understanding the business and the new wave to figure out what else should the company be doing.
We're already talking about aspects that are beyond your personal journey here. I would like to come back to what you learned during your CIO tenure. And interestingly, you said, I learned more about the business. This is awesome. But what did you learn about IT that helps you now as the CEO of e-commerce that you wouldn't have learned if you didn't have that role of CIO before?
That's a very good question. And we're doing a lot of acquisitions now in my business. We're acquiring 1 or 2 companies per year. And what I have learned is that these IT integrations and IT migrations are extraordinarily complicated. And they could really be the main roadblock for getting things done. Based on that experience, now I pay extra attention to anything IT related when we are acquiring new company, not only what they come with, but also how to migrate it to our own environment. In general, is the alignment between business and IT. That is the main learning that we need to have, in particular, the IT organizations as close as possible to the business. We used to have an initiative in my days in IT that every single IT person 1 day per month had to be either going out with a courier to deliver packages or with a salesperson to sell or sitting 1 full day in customer service to answer phone calls. And those, again, no rocket science things, but they're so important to bring the IT organizations to help the business and understand the business. So learning about the business was a big learning in that case.
Really cool. Are there also initiatives that you apply that work the other way around? You're talking about IT people needing to learn about the business. What about business people understanding about the limitations of IT, the opportunities of IT?
I don't know if there's a cure for that ever, because, business people are always, going to underappreciate the complexity of IT. IT projects have become much more agile. Before, as you recall, you needed to implement an IT change or an IT project or process, and it was, I know, months and years of things. Today, with the microservices architecture and APIs and all of that, you can get things done much faster. So that is better. So the time to market is much better. That said, of course, business always need to be permanently educated, and in particular, not that much educated on what we can do or not do, is doing things how much we can do at the same time. I think that's the main, because as we always said, these are processes, people, and technology. And sometimes what we have learned is that, in particular with the new IT architecture that is more agile and allows you to do things faster, sometimes you can do a lot of things super fast from an IT perspective, but the business cannot cope with the changes. And we have in our operation systems, when we are talking about doing things that can impact 50,000 couriers in one geography, if you introduce an IT change that requires that the courier will have to do something different every single morning, every single month, you end up driving the people crazy. It's like we all go into our favorite app on the phone, and you are changing the app every single week. Well, then at some point in time, you are tired. It's helping, of course, the organization understand what can be done, but also making sure that we can implement change in a way that the business can digest it.
Myself and Martin have been using this distinction, and you in your conversation as well, IT in the business. We have this just language that sort of reinforces kind of that gap between the IT department and the rest of the business. How do we overcome that? That we just see, well, this is part of the business.
It's a very good observation, and I don't know if it will ever be resolved, because the nature of the IT function is one that requires an extraordinary level of expertise for the people that are in sort of the kitchen of the IT organization. If you think about that, it's a characteristic of IT and not many other functions. The expertise that you need in order to understand what needs to be done from an IT perspective, and the profile of individuals that you need to have, taking care of that expertise, then might become a little bit of a detached and a barrier to be too close to the business. And that's why I think it's a little bit of the nature of the function. If you go to any other function, complexity and uniqueness of the people that are in the manufacturing room of the function is not that different, right? So if you know numbers, you can be a finance person very closely connected to the business. Someone that is deep into the HR function will not be dealing with the level of uniqueness and specificity compared to an IT person. So I think that is a nature of the function, which I think that will remain like that, because even though AI will empower more people to do more IT things, it will still require a level of expertise beyond other functions.
If I am head of manufacturing, let's say for a company, what I am and am not responsible for is very, very clear. If there's problems in relation to the quality of what we produce, that probably comes down to me. It's the manufacturing process. But let's say there's an issue in terms of not delivering on time to a customer, even though we've made a promise. We can probably say that's logistics, distribution. I got it to the factory door. The problem lay when it left the factory en route to the customer. So it's very, very clear. But when we take that to IT, you're responsible for the systems to make sure they continue to function, etc. But actually, It's more than that. The success with technology is more than that. We know that technology's got no inherent value, so we can deploy the technology if nobody's using it. And of course, if nobody's using it, we don't get any value. But the blame is laid at the door of IT. Oh, it's IT's fault.
IT has multiple layers, right? It's, the layer of the basic infrastructure of, how data flows and where data is hosted. You have the layers of application and processing. That is not something that you see in other functions. IT function has so many layers that is within the responsibility that makes it more complicated. And also today, even companies like ours, where we consider a very digitally driven company, but we are a very analog company. Our business model is moving a package from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. It's unlikely that our business model will be disrupted by teletransportation of parcels with Amazon. So not likely that our industry will face, for now, something like what happened in the entertainment industry with Netflix. Still, we are a very analog company that we are 100% driven by IT, and IT is the nerve system that connects everything. It's deep into the organization, but responsibility of only one function. So it's a little bit of a very special animal. You don't have marketing embedded in every single function. Finance is more about counting the numbers, and of course, with all respect to CFOs, they don't have that type of influence in how the business operates. Mm-hmm. Instead, IT has influence in every single aspect of the business. It goes very deep into the organization with a level of expertise that makes it, again, this dilemma between IT and business. When I was in IT, I loved it, but it's not a very pleasant profession and function, because, as I like to say, the lows are very low and the highs are not that high. Nobody will call you tomorrow Monday and say, hey, thank you for having all the systems working during the weekend, and thank you for doing that migration, which was extraordinarily risky and super complicated. Well done. Of course, the phone will ring immediately as soon as you have a tiny little, hiccup in any type of system.
Mm. Let me jump on that. That is great. So you said being in IT requires a lot of expertise. So these have to be experts. So we cannot expect every business leader to be an expert in all things IT or all things digital. And still, you have to be able, as a business executive, to challenge key parts of what is called IT projects, but they're not IT projects. They're business projects. They're about making the delivery process or the dispatch process better, automating it, getting more revenue from it. So what do business executives need to know about digital? What do they need to know about IT? And how do they get that? Do they all have to become CIOs like you have?
No, I don't think so. But it's really understanding the underlying processes more than the IT. Because if the business executives understand the underlying processes and they can relate that to IT, they don't need to be IT experts. I never knew how to code. I had a pretty good understanding of the basics of IT in terms of storage processing and architecture and all of that, but I never went deeper than that. Good story that at some point in time, we needed to upgrade our customer-facing shipping tools, the tool that a regular customer, either a business or individual, will go and enter the data, print a label, and pay, and so on. A critical touch point for customers. And when we embark in that journey, of course, everyone was thinking about the user interface. Okay, let's bring in the best user interface design company and different personas and segments and what type of application we needed. But then the moment that was designed, it came very clear that, of course, all of this web shipping application was interfacing with all our backend system for tracking customer service, electronic payment, electronic invoicing, track and trace. And all of that was coming from 100 systems that were running across the company. And only when a manager, an executive, can understand the underlying business that, hey, our tracking comes from when the courier is scanning a package, and we have 25 scanning events for a package, and that is feeding our global database for scanning. It has to be linked into the waybill number, and only that then could be related to a customer-facing shipping tool. So unless you understand how the scanning process works in operations and how many scans are required to complete a parcel delivery, and then you can connect it to the web shipping tool. Unless you understand all of that, again, process, people, technology, it's difficult to have a conversation. So long answer to your question, it's not that much about understanding IT. If I have to really provide some advice to someone who is a middle manager who says, hey, I want to really continue growing in the company and I need to know enough about IT in order in the future to guide the IT organization, I wouldn't send him or her to do an coding training. Deep dive into the processes, understand the core process of the company, and spend time with the functions and see how people are using the tool externally and internally. And only then you can talk about IT.
So it's more about having this systems view of the sort of the connectedness of all of the elements of the organization and how it sort of comes together, which is the antithesis of the functional perspective. So I work in marketing. I've been there for 20 years. I know how marketing works. I don't really know how, other parts of the business work because I only interface with them, but as how they actually operate, I don't know. What you're saying is that having this, and this is maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, maybe, moving first of all from that, chief of staff role into IT gave you that view right across the organization, because if you work in IT, you have to have that. And I think colleagues in finance would say, well, we do as well. But my view is that if you work in finance, you dip in and out of it, areas of the business.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think that the main attribute of a good IT person among many is curiosity. Is the curiosity to really understand how and the system thinking and curiosity. If I have to hire a CIO who knows the latest about how to code with Python, although that might be obsolete in 2 years with AI, or someone that is very high in system thinking and curiosity, I will go for the system thinking and curiosity, because that is really what is going, independent of the IT landscape and capabilities. That is what is going to help the business evolve.
Our podcast is called Doing Digital Differently. And it's clear that companies need to be doing something differently, because for decades now, study after study reports 90% of the digital investments or IT investments don't produce the value you expect. So from your experience, what would be the number one thing that companies need to do differently to get more value from their digital investments?
That's a good question. I would say that start with the customer. Start with the customer, and then backwards from there, figure out what IT and processes are required in order to gain and retain customers. And then from an IT perspective, I will also add, it's all about the architecture. The architecture has to be flexible enough to remain agile. Today, my business operates in 15 countries, and we have 15 different IT landscapes, which will be absolutely ridiculous to try to converge into one single, because there will be very limited benefit from a convergence, because we're not a network. We are 15 isolated businesses. That said, all the modernization that is taking place in each country, the number one priority, of course, is IT security. But the number two is that it has to follow a certain architecture standard. And eventually tomorrow we can unplug things from here to there and connect it.
See, this is so interesting, right? That you started with a non-tech thing. You said, hey, start from the customer. This is not about technology. Don't start with technology. Start from where are customer pain points? How can we help our customers? And then think about how can you use technology to make that happen.
Yeah.
But then if you really want me to talk about more tech-related things, then it would be this. How you talk about IT and how you talk about architecture. It's interesting to see that you speak those two languages fluently, right? You talk about platforms, you talk about architecture, and it doesn't mean that you're a techie and that you can code, but you do speak the language and you know what it actually means. And I think your time as a CIO, that sounds like your time in jail, your time as a CIO has really shaped you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were, referring to the 15 different systems, you actually got 15 different businesses that are really sort of separate. You're getting into some of the architectural choices. DHL Express was promoting a different operating model because in the express business, it's all about standardization and very high levels of data integration. What you're saying here is that, your e-commerce business, you operate, as I said, 15 different regions because they're very separate. You don't need this. Their operating model is going to be different. And then you recognize then that has implications for technology choices. So the technology choices that you would make in respect of your e-commerce business are quite different from those that you would have made in the express business. But it's because they've got different operating models. And you, as a business leader, you recognize this. We often come across business leaders when we sort of get into conversations around architecture and operating models, eyes glaze over because they say, my enterprise architects look after this. Whereas really it's a business decision, a business choice.
Absolutely. And that's a very, very good observation because I worked 15 years plus in DHL Express. I was part of that convergence program that started in the US, but then it was global. We went from 7,000 plus systems globally to 110, which is the eGap global application portfolio. It was a massive, but it always following the same logic. It was about a platform, process, people's IT. And in the express business is a global network. You send something from Tokyo to New York and it's the same waybill, the same number, the same track and trace, the same. So it's very integrated, irrespective that it's different countries, the same customer service was very standardized. When I moved to the business that I'm running now, DHL eCommerce, I came a little bit with that original idea, those glasses, very biased glasses, say, well, we need to embark in a convergence program similar to very rapidly realize that didn't make any sense. And there are some few things where you can standardize the finance and accounting system. You can standardize some type of very basic HR process. But then when the underlying business are very disconnected, it's not really good time and energy to embark in that convergence program. So you're right. That said, again, we are pushing to have, again, some standards, architecture, IT security, and some others. And of course, whenever we have one country that is, requiring in one of their processes a new tool, we will look first inside to see, do we have something that we can reuse, but it's not a push type of convergence program.
And can you say again why?
Because the business models, they have similarities, but they're not exactly the same.
Can you give an example?
In India, we have 7 different type of delivery products: air B2B, air B2C, documents, ground B2B, ground B2C, and so on. In the US, we only have one, and all our last mile deliveries is through the USPS. So we don't have last mile delivery. We have the first mile, the pickup, and the middle mile, but we don't have last mile. So even in those two extremes, we can find some commonalities. So a sorting center will sort it, but it's not really, it's different profile. We do SMEs in India. So there is commonalities, but not exactly the same.
And in DHL Express, it's time definite international, and that's the core product, and it's the same. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, Pablo. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. That was a superb interview, Martin. I really enjoyed our conversation with Pablo. There's a lot to unpack. So where do you want to start?
Let's take a few minutes to reflect on what we heard from Pablo, and especially how this connects back to the ideas we opened this episode here. And our key point was that IT is not my job is an issue for business executives if they come with that mindset.
I think a couple of things I picked up from the conversation that very much relate to that. I think, first of all, Pablo mentioned on numerous occasions platforms. Today, we talk a lot about platforms, and there's multiple meanings, but he was very, very clear. For him, at least, it means people, process, and technology. It's the three of them together. They're not separate, which I thought was quite an interesting perspective to take. So maybe to sort of maybe shift the conversation away from purely IT to platforms. And when you start talking about platforms, yes, there's technology, but you also need to be cognizant of the process element as well as the people element.
Exactly. And so when we talk about getting value from digital or IT investments, and if people say, "Oh, that's not my job," what we mean is you don't need to become a techie. What it means is you need to understand the business, and the business is actually people, process, technology. It's not just people, it's not just process, but it's those things together.
And I think, again, another aspect of the conversation that really stood out for me was when you asked Pablo at the end, what would he do differently? One of the things he mentioned was around this notion of systems thinking. And I think if we link that back with some of his earlier comments in relation to what did he get, when I moved from being chief of staff, working directly with the CEO into an IT role, I now begun to understand the business.
And that was fascinating, right? That he learned just enough what the IT landscape should look like and understanding IT well enough. But he emphasized the point you just mentioned, becoming CIO. I understood the business better. And what he means is exactly this, the people, process, technology connection, the system part, as you just said. How do these things fit together?
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the connectedness, which is, I suppose, so fundamental to getting information systems right in organizations. As he was kind of recounting his experiences, it brought me back to when I started teaching. I remember, an article that I used to always recommend, and indeed I still do, that was published way back in 1992, titled "Staple Yourself to a Customer Order." And that was really a great article which really emphasized for students that if you really want to understand how your organization works, well, assume the role of an order and walk yourself through the company. Now, of course, today we probably refer to that as maybe customer journey map.
That is true, but the ideas haven't really changed there. The article also talks about the systemic view. We just talked about this, the connectedness. We'll put a link in the show notes to the article. That is a great one. So that is one way, indeed, one way to acquire this systemic view. For Pablo, clearly was, I take on the role of CIO. But we also said, probably not everyone can become CIO. Not everyone wants to become CIO. And so this idea of stapling yourself to an order, going through the process and understanding the people, process, technology connections there, that's another way how you can acquire that.
Yeah, and I suppose to that point, I know a couple of CEOs who did spend, at least some of their early career in IT, not as CIO, who spent a couple of years working in enterprise architecture. And again, they would say that gave them the kind of a perspective, of the connectedness of the systems and how all of the elements of the organization should work with each other, and then how maybe technology and data can support that.
Totally. I think it's actually a great idea to have a systematic rotation into more technology roles and out of technology roles to get this cross-functional systemic view. The very least I think that you need is curiosity. He mentioned that term as well.
Yes.
That you need to be curious. You need to be wanting to understand this and not just say, coming back to our key point here, that's not my job. It's part of your job to understand. It's your job to understand the business, and technology is just an inseparable part by now of this.
And I would imagine that if we had dug a little bit deeper with Pablo in relation to this notion of curiosity, we would have probably got into the whole area of innovation, testing and learning, because that is about being curious about how the capabilities of generative AI, for example, might be used in some areas of our business, for example.
Cool. All right. So that was one area that we talked about. IT is not my job. Whose job is that? What does that actually mean?
A related area that he delved into, and possibly we may have walked them there, was the whole notion of kind of architecture and operating model. I found his perspective kind of fascinating, and how his time in IT, his understanding of operating models and architecture now helps him in the CEO role, particularly when it comes to acquisitions.
Yeah, totally. Now that we use the term operating model here, Pablo, you and I are pretty aligned on what this actually means. Probably have to explain, because there's so many different ways how people define an operating model, what they understand when they use the term. And for us, it's the desired level of, on the one hand, business process standardization, and on the other hand, data integration across these processes. And there are various operating models, and he talked about two of them, namely DHL Express having a very different need for business process standardization and integration than DHL eCommerce, a different unit within DHL Group, has. And that comes from, well, what are the requirements of the business? DHL Express, one key standard product, namely time definite international. You're sending a package from A to B. It's typically international. And the way to guarantee a certain time window of delivery when you send something from Sao Paulo to Sydney is that processes are standardized. Everyone's doing the same thing. And the way you get a global view of this package as it travels through different geographies is you need data integration there. And with DHL eCommerce, he mentioned, no, it's very different. He gave lots of examples. In India, it's very different from the US. It's not one product. Even the products are different. Yes, we do standardize some things, but mostly we actually don't standardize. And this would have been the wrong choice for him becoming CEO of that business after having been in DHL Express, if he had just said, oh, that's exactly the same thing here, and I'm going to standardize processes, IT systems, and data everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in my work with executives, I sometimes find that they can struggle to make a distinction between what you just talked about there, the operating model and architecture. When I work with groups of executives, what I try to do is maybe kind of give them the analogy of, let's say a construction project, a building, an architect, where the operating model equivalent would be, what are you as maybe a customer, somebody's going to fund the construction, what do you actually want from a building? So that's the equivalent of the operating model. And then the architecture then will get to work on the underpinning design. So again, I might specify that from my building, I want, ceilings at a certain height. I might want, 3-4 bathrooms, for example. I might specify that, I want this to be kind of a party house. So that's my operating model. And then the architect will kind of get to work on designing the building. The equivalent would be in IT terms, then obviously designing the underpinning IT systems in order to support those requirements.
And the key point indeed is different ways of doing business, different operating models have an implication on what's the priority for IT, for the architecture. It's not easy to change. And this is where we come back again. This is a business decision. This might sound like, oh, this is a technology decision. It's not. It's a business decision. How do you want to grow? How do you want to work across geographies? How do you want to work across business units as a business? And that has implications for your IT investments, the IT architecture. For example, do you want one global system? Do you want to copy the systems from one geography to the next? Do you need to standardize what a product is everywhere on this planet, or can that differ? And so you either get lots of economies of scale, or you get lots of local responsiveness, flexibility through autonomous business units, country organizations. You can't have it all. That's what it says.
Yeah. And I would recommend to have a look at a case study actually that was published in MIS Quarterly Executive on Judo Bank. We can put it in the show notes. What's fascinating about Judo Bank is that they don't own or operate any of their own IT systems. So here you have an organization, in this case it happens to be a bank, that's, it's got digital product, digital engagement with customers, employees working with data and digital tools, operating in a highly regulated environment that doesn't own or operate any of its own IT systems. So I think that kind of helps you maybe think about some of these points that we're raising here in relation to architecture and operating model.
So now we talked about the systemic view. When we say IT is your job, it's actually, people, process, technology is your job. Now we talked about the operating model as one of the key decisions business executives need to make, and that have IT implications, and understanding that is also super important, just like with IT and mergers. There's a third theme that we touched upon with Pablo that we mentioned in the beginning of this episode, which is the alphabet soup problem. So creating a proliferation of new roles, CDOs, chief data officers, chief analytics officers, chief AI officers. And we talked about that as an indicator for, I need someone else to take care of this. This is not my job.
I think if we look at the history of technology in organizations, that sort of shift from, let's say, the IT director to suddenly then we have a chief information officer, which was probably a shift that kind of begun to move the emphasis away from the technology and more to the information component. Then we had the chief digital officer with big data, the chief data officer with analytics, the chief analytics officer. And today, a lot of companies are putting in place, or at least introducing a new role, the chief AI officer. And I think Pablo did have an interesting comment to make in respect of that. And essentially was, you need somebody in the organization to be thinking about the implications of this new technology, for example. Somebody needs to be doing it, which might also indicate why, when we look at surveys, let's say of chief data officers, of chief digital officers, that, their tenures tend not to be very long. So maybe these are temporary roles in order maybe to stimulate the thinking, the conversation, but actually expecting, a chief digital officer to somehow digitally transform the organization, or a chief AI officer suddenly to drive the organization to become, an AI-fueled organization. That is folly.
Yeah. Because the digital transformation is actually a transformation of the people, process, technology part, to come back to that and link it to that again. And no single tech or digital executive will be able to do that. It's an organizational transformation. Absolutely. That's a lot that we discussed here. If you only had one sentence for your key takeaway from what Pablo said, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it would be about the kind of that systems perspective, understanding the connectedness of the organization, design. There were many takeaways, but if you asked me to select one, that would be it. And you?
Stay curious, it would be for me. I think that's a great recommendation for anyone out there.
So thank you for listening to this episode of Doing Digital Differently, produced by MIS Quarterly Executive. If you have comments, contact details are in the show notes. Also, when you are there, check out the links and references. Until next time, take care.
Bye.